From the very first day of World War II until almost the last, the RAF's Bomber Command waged a non-stop campaign against Nazi Germany. 55,000 airmen were killed. Half a century later, a statue dedicated to those men and their leader, Sir Arthur Harris, was unveiled in central London.
As patron of the Bomber Command Association, I'm very pleased to be able to join you today on this memorable occasion. The service of remembrance and reconciliation which we have just attended.
Rather than fading with time, controversy over the RAF's relentless bombing of German cities has grown and has come to focus on the man known to friends and enemies alike as Bomber Harris. For years, many people have disputed whether the British strategy of city bombing had any justification, in moral or even in military terms. Critics have claimed that bombing did little to help win the war and wasted both airmen's lives and valuable resources. Arthur Harris never publicly spoke his mind, but recently uncovered private interviews with him, together with the reflections of former aircrew, finally give the men of Bomber Command a chance to tell their side of the story.
The film we are going to show you is about a cross-country flight. The aeroplane has been inspected in the hangar and is now being pushed out onto the aerodrome.
In the summer of 1939, Rod Rodley was in the RAF Volunteer Reserve.
I went up to flights one morning and my lovely Hawker Hart was standing there. And some mechanics working underneath the wing, and I said, "What are you doing?" And they said, "We're putting on bomb racks." And a cold shudder went through my spine. I thought, bomb racks on a training hind, or heart, as it was. It must be quite dangerous. Everything's getting very close.
At the outbreak of war, the RAF's bomber force was outnumbered and hopelessly ill-equipped compared with the German Luftwaffe. Britain needed to quickly rearm with fast, modern aircraft.
The fact that quality has been the hallmark of the RAF becomes of infinite importance now that quantity is also demanded. It means that high standards of design and craftsmanship will inspire our mass production.
But the new designs were still on the drawing board. The only bombers that could be quickly mass-produced were already obsolete.
Sandbags.
Everyone was expecting the war to begin with bombing raids on cities.
They built bastions, dug trenches, shaped the raw earth with their hands to make the city safe.
In fact, the Germans didn't attack. Only the phony war had begun.
The first leaflet raid over Poland. British bombers are taking aboard thousands of leaflets with the intention of bringing the truth to German-occupied Poland. The pilots and crews are all set for the longest air raid of the war. The machines are tuned up to the highest pitch. The rear gunner is in his place in the tail of the plane, ready to...
The government wanted the RAF to be seen to be able to fly over German territory, but without actually bombing and risking retaliation.
800 miles, the British machines are over their objective. The flaps are opened, and
Arthur Harris, then a bomber group commander, had his own views on the matter.
It was a nonsensical business. Absolutely nonsensical. Terribly hard to keep up morale. Fellas wondering whether it was worthwhile to get killed distributing pamphlets.
Both the British and the Germans had told their air forces they must avoid bombing civilians. Canadian pilot Mike Lewis.
We were placed on standby to attack German naval units if they ventured out into the North Sea. And that's as far as we could go. We could not drop bombs on land. And what would happen if there was a rumor of a ship coming out, or several ships? They would launch a squadron, and we would tear out to try and find them. And most times we didn't find anything at all.
Each man has his own special...
By November, Bomber Command had still made little impact against the German Navy.
Without hesitation...
Winston Churchill, then First Lord of the Admiralty, began badgering the Air Force for results.
Efficiency to the work. Every preparation is finished. Everything is ready.
On the 18th of December, 22 Wellingtons set off towards the port of Wilhelmshaven. The latest German fighters were 150 miles an hour faster than the British bombers. Rear gunner Harry Jones.
And this one peeled off and came straight towards us. And I was quite put out about this. I thought, well, that's not very fair. You know, shooting at me. I haven't done anything to him. But this is how your brain works.
12 of the 22 Wellingtons were shot down. Harry Jones survived to spend 5.5 years as a prisoner of war. The RAF were beginning to realise that in daylight, their bombers were simply too vulnerable to the German fighters.
The mad dog is on the march again. Once more he breaks every bond of international decency. Now he has thrown off the very last shreds of honour. He brings all the horrors of total warfare to three of the fairest and cleanest of neutrals in Western Europe. Pity the peoples of these nations, whose fair lands the mad dog has made his bloody battleground.
In August 1940, the Germans launched their assault on Britain, with bombing raids on fighter airfields. But they were making the same mistake as the British had, by attacking in daylight. New Zealand bomber pilot Jim Verron.
The Battle of Britain, you know, we were all aware of it and we were very thankful that they were doing so well. But whilst the Battle of Britain was going on, there were a whole stack of other things happening.
Photo reconnaissance over the French coastal ports had revealed a sinister development. Germans were rapidly assembling an armada of barges in readiness for the invasion of England. The barges had to be destroyed. Bomber Command air crews were briefed to attack immediately with every aircraft they had. In just 10 days, they flew almost 1,000 sorties, sinking enough of Hitler's fleet to disable his planned conquest of Britain. But the bombers' success had a price.
We lost more people doing that than we lost in the Battle of Britain. Do you know that?
Headlines in pictures at last. How I've been longing to say this. The RAF are back from bombing Berlin.
The first bombs on London had provoked Churchill, now Prime Minister, to send the RAF against the German capital.
While Hitler's trained murderers bomb British homes and machine gun women and children in the streets, these grand men of the RAF strike blow after blow at the military and industrial objectives of Nazi Germany and wherever the shadow of the swastika falls.
Well, how'd you get on?
Pretty well, so we got the target all right.
Good. Let's have a rough idea of the immediate rate report. First of all, what time did you bomb?
Actually at 23:59, sir.
And you dropped all your bombs?
Yes, we put them down in one stick from east to west, right across the target.
Did you see any results?
Well, we'd seen a large fire about 25 miles away when we were running up on Berlin. And we flew, that was in the south side of the city. So we went over and had a look at that.
Oh, then you flew across the city?
Yes, slap across the center. Altogether, we spent half an hour checking up on the target. And when we definitely identified it, we ran up and dropped our bombs.
Thank you. There's the immediate rate report.
In September, the Germans began their nighttime blitz on London. By now, both sides had abandoned the policy of avoiding civilian casualties.
You're forgetting, said the Hun, that your streets are overrun with the homeless and the hungry and the halt. Not to mention, said the Hun, that your buildings by the ton are succumbing to our aerial assault. And the palace of your king has a badly crippled wing. Crazy Cockney, the blitzkrieg's but begun. It's your diet for duration. Why the stubborn hesitation? What about capitulation? Said the Hun.
Now a staff officer at the Air Ministry, Arthur Harris watched the blitz with the Chief of the Air Staff, Sir Charles Portal.
Yes, I remember the night well. You could see St. Paul standing out amidst the flames, and I told Portal, who was still working down in his office, I said, you better come up and see this because it's something will probably never occur again, or we hope won't occur again. It's worth seeing. And I said then, well, they're sowing the wind and they will reap the whirlwind.
In retaliation, Churchill urged the RAF to begin mass bombing attacks on German cities. The Prime Minister knew that if public morale was to survive the Blitz, Britain had to be seen to be hitting back. After Dunkirk, any land attack was out of the question. To a desperate nation, the only weapon available was the bomber. But despite Churchill's enthusiasm for mass bombing, Bomber Command continued to pride itself on mounting precision raids on military targets at night. Australian pilot Peter Swan.
One of the films that I remember seeing during the war was Target for Tonight, which I suppose on reflection was, you would say today, a propaganda film.
Bomb doors open, bomb doors open. Left, left.
It showed the men doing a raid, and if I remember the film, and it's ages since I've seen it, it was a successful raid.
Bomb's gone.
But I think we've learned subsequently through history that a lot of these raids weren't quite as successful as was stated at the time, or as shown in this particular film.
By mid-1941, the bombers were suffering disastrous losses. Yet a government survey revealed that only 1 in 10 aircraft were managing to drop their bombs within 5 miles of the target.
Go and get an ambulance, will you? The operator's copped it.
The news shocked the Air Ministry. It meant that Bomber Command's losses over nearly 2 years of war had virtually been for nothing. Whitehall was buzzing with theories on how to make bombing more effective. Lord Cherwell, Churchill's scientific advisor, proposed targeting not just factories, but German workers in their homes. The plan was called dehousing. It would not require accurate bombing. The War Cabinet was convinced, justifying the new policy as an attempt to undermine the morale of the German people. The government was now fully committed to attacking civilians. Fresh orders to area bomb German cities awaited the new chief of Bomber Command.
Nazis entered this war under the rather childish delusion that they were going to bomb everybody else and nobody was going to bomb them. At Rotterdam, London, Warsaw, and half 100 other places, they put that rather naive theory into operation. They sowed the wind, and now they are going to reap the whirlwind.
Aged 49, with a young family and a reputation for bluntness, Arthur Harris took over Bomber Command in February 1942. Although he carried out his directive, Harris did not believe that attacking civilian morale would be effective. He was convinced the war could only be won by the total destruction of German industry, and he knew that new aircraft and radar navigation aids would soon be available.
Greatest and most powerful of the RAF's mighty fleet of bombers, Lancasters electrified the world with their spectacular debut in the epic daylight raid on Augsburg. Here was the machine that should bring to fruition Winston Churchill's promise that Germany would be subjected to an ordeal the like of which has never been experienced by any country. To the people who built the Lancasters, each doing his own task to the best of his ability, their success came as no surprise. In the bottom story of the three-decker nose is the window from which the bomb aimer sees the landscape he proposes to change more than somewhat.
The new bombers were consuming vast resources, despite fierce opposition from the Army and Navy. The bombing offensive had as many critics in Whitehall as enemies in Germany. The rival services even disputed the need for a separate RAF bomber force. Harris had to confound the doubters once and for all.
Aircraft, O for Orange, M for Mother, L for London. All three with 4,003 cans. The 4,000 on number 13 as usual.
In May, Harris planned the most audacious gamble. Bomber pilot Leonard Cheshire.
I don't know how it is that what a CNC is at the remote top filters through to the man in the frontline squadron, but it does. When Bomber Harris came, you knew that Bomber Command was going to see it through to the end. And you sort of felt a push. And we felt at last that we were really going to have to pull our socks up and get on with it.
On the night of the gargantuan raid over Cologne, a voice echoed through the briefing rooms of Britain's bomber stations. Group captains read the inspiring message of Air Marshal Travers Harris, Commander-in-Chief, Bomber Command. The Air Marshal supervised the mammoth raids organization. His words made eager airmen thrill to their history-making task. The bomber station commanders made his message live in every...
Pilot John G.
The adjutant, Wimpy Wellman, said to me, "John, have you made your will?" And I said, "No, I haven't." He said, "Right, we'll soon sort that out for you." And he sent for one of the pilots, who was Tony Ford, who was a solicitor by profession. And within about 10 minutes, we made my will. I think my estate consisted of one bicycle and a cricket bat, or something like that, you know. So it didn't take long to do that. But, you know, they thought the chances of me getting through were virtually nil.
And then direct to Nordland, and then direct to base. You understand? I'd like to read you the message which I've just received from the C&C. Let him have it, right on the chin.
The new colossal Manchesters, with their tons-heavy bomb load, prepare to fly with Halifaxes. Halifaxes and Manchesters with long-limbed Lancasters. Lancasters, Halifaxes, Manchesters with Stirlings. Stirlings, Halifaxes, Manchesters and Lancasters with Wellingtons and Hampdens. Great British names for great British planes.
While crews are being briefed, airwomen are getting their rations ready. Flasks of coffee, biscuits, chocolate, barley sugar, chewing gum, sandwiches. It's going to be a long trip without even a cigarette.
48 double sandwiches, Robinson.
All right, flight 22 bag.
Right.
Navigator Peter Hinchcliffe.
Expression, if you excuse it, I got shit scared, and I was just terribly frightened. Every operation. But, but I do. I think we were all frightened. What do you do about it? There's no way you can. Who is going to be the first to get the crew together and say, look, I want to tell you I'm frightened, I'm scared, in the hope that they're all going to say, well, I'm scared as well, let's pack it in. But you can't do that, you see. Who's going to take the first step?
"1,047 bombers took off. Harris was risking his entire force, even training aircraft, on one huge raid.
Reports begin to come in from the aircraft over Germany. The duty officer chalks up the progress of the raid, as reports arrive from each aircraft over the target area.
Anything for Robert yet? Oh.
Hello, Control. Arthur Robert calling Control. What is my turn for landing? Arthur Robert, over to Control. Over. Hello, Robert. Hello, Robert.
Public and politicians alike were astounded by the scale of the 3 successive 1,000-bomber raids on Cologne, Essen and Bremen. Harris had silenced both the German defences and Bomber Command's critics.
Chief of the Air Staff, Sir Charles Portal, has sent a message to the Commander-in-Chief, Bomber Command, in which he congratulates not only the air crews, but also the ground personnel who contributed to the successful conclusion of a series of operations, culminating in last night's attack. To quote his own words, this outstanding achievement reflects the greatest credit on everyone concerned. Everyone concerned. Everyone.
I remember initially, Winston was very disappointed with the results when I sent him the photograph. He expected to see nothing but a sheet of ashes, you see. And I got the photographic interpretation people to put a red dot on every house in Cologne that had visible damage. But I took it back to Winston with these massive red dots all over Cologne. Oh, he said, that's better, that's better, that's better.
Flags of freedom waved proudly at the meeting that thrilled the world when Britain's Premier Churchill called on the Soviet hero Stalin.
Churchill badly needed Harris's success. The Prime Minister knew that Stalin was frustrated by Britain's reluctance to invade France and open a second front. If the Russians were forced into a truce with Germany, it would be a disaster for Britain.
A rapid drive through the streets of Moscow to the Kremlin, where the historic meeting took
At
place.
their first meeting in August 1942, Stalin accused the British of cowardice. Only Churchill's news of the RAF's bombing of the German homeland placated the Soviet leader. and cemented the crucial alliance with Russia. Harris was convinced that given enough bombers, he could win the war without even the need for a land invasion.
There are a lot of people who say that bombing can never win a war. Well, my answer to that is that it has never been tried yet, and we shall see.
Harris had calculated he would need 4,000 heavy bombers, but he was under increasing pressure from the Navy, who were demanding aircraft be diverted from pounding Germany to scouring the Atlantic for submarines. German U-boats had been increasing their attacks on Atlantic convoys since 1941 in an attempt to cut supply routes to the British Isles.
Larga el torpedo.
The Admiralty wanted all our bombers looking for needles in the haystack. And we said the place to get the submarines was where they were born, not where they went to. And of course we were right. And who says we were right? Albert Speer, he was responsible for producing submarines and everything else. And he says quite plainly in his book, we would have kept to our promised output of submarines for Admiral Donitz if the bombers had not destroyed a third of them in the ports. Well, we certainly would never have destroyed a third of them looking for them in the Atlantic.
Dieses Boot wird nach Fertigstellung breitseits vom Stapel gelassen, da nicht genügend Ablauffläche vorhanden ist.
In January 1943, Churchill met with Roosevelt at Casablanca. The Prime Minister used the growing effectiveness of the bombing campaign to try to convince the Americans of the wisdom of postponing a land attack until 1944. The Casablanca Directive listed 3 key targets: U-boat yards, the Luftwaffe, and all centres of German war production. That, of course, meant cities.
One of the greatest serial stories of the war, the battering of Hamburg. By night and day, the big German city was subjected to Allied air assaults without parallel in history.
Bomber Command was now being given priority in all technical developments. At Hamburg, the bombers used an ingenious new secret device. Codenamed Window, it was simply strips of metal foil, dropped en route to the target. The result was the complete jamming of German radar. The bombers went unchallenged and the raid caused a devastating firestorm.
In almost less time than it takes to tell, the cargoes of our bombers shattered military objectives in the city and started hundreds of fires. The second installment of our serial story takes us again on the way to Hamburg in daylight, this time with the United States Army Air Force. In these attacks, some 4,000 American flying men, including fighter escorts, went into action. Close study of these stills shows that much damage of military importance was done. Objectives identified as having been thoroughly blitzed in this, Germany's second largest city and biggest port, include the huge gasworks, the Blohm-and-Voss submarine slips, port installations, shipping, shipbuilding yards, marshalling yards, locomotive sheds, and hundreds of factories. Neutral sources report that in 8 heavy Allied raids on Hamburg, more than 58,000 people lost their lives and 180,000 lost their jobs. That's nearly 250,000 German war workers less than a week ago. A brilliant tribute to Allied Knights of the Air.
Arthur Harris.
Of course, the thing is that the Air Force is always accused of carrying out war against the civil population. All major wars are always and always have been against the civil population. What army besieging a major city has ever allowed the civil population out? Haven't they always adopted the idea the more mouths in there, the sooner they'll have eaten the last cat, dog and sewer rat and have to come out and surrender. And meanwhile, every missile they can lob into the unfortunate city is lobbed in there.
Harris's bluntness did not endear him to the British hierarchy, but the media were fascinated by him. His uncompromising style and clear statements of purpose echoed the widespread public support for bombing. It was well reported that many German civilians were being killed. Yet in Parliament, MPs' questions about the targeting of people and their homes met with repeated denials by the Air Minister that Bomber Command had been ordered to area bomb German cities. But cities were not the only targets for attack. In May of 1943, on a daring low-level raid, Lancasters of 617 Squadron broke the huge Mona and Ada dams in the Ruhr Valley. Soon after, RAF reconnaissance aircraft spotted Hitler's secret rocket development center.
A whispering from occupied Europe had kept our intelligence in touch with the German experiments. Our attention was directed to a small island on the Baltic coast, and finally focused on the northern tip. There was Peenemünde.
When we were briefed for Peenemünde, it's the only briefing I ever went to where the briefing hut was surrounded by service police, and we were told if word leaks out that what the target is, the source will be summarily executed.
Bomber Command was given a special job, the job of wiping Peenemünde off the map.
Canadian gunner Wilkie Wanless.
We were taking pictures for the RAF film unit, and we kept flying back and forth over this darn target, and the navigator, the pilot's name was Sanderson, and the navigator kept saying, "Well, I think the damn thing's working now, Sandy. Do another run." And of course, this was just terribly nerve-wracking.
The bombing had to be accurate. Using new techniques, a specialist Pathfinder squadron dropped coloured flares, identifying the research centre for the other bombers. The raid was a success. Enough damage was done to seriously delay Hitler's rocket weapon program. During the winter of 1943, the Pathfinder's technique was perfected. Flying Lancasters and Mosquitoes, they guided huge fleets of bombers to Berlin with far greater accuracy. Flight engineer Norman Berryman.
We had dropped a considerable tonnage of bombs on Berlin, and I can always remember Jimmy turning to me and saying, "I hope we didn't hurt anybody."
Pilot Bill Reed.
You know, all these Londoners that were going down into this, the underground every night. I don't think they would have liked to think somebody else was being bombed like that, you know, if they thought it out. But yet they really cheered because they felt that this was at least hitting back at them and giving them a touch of their own medicine. And there's nothing truer than what Harris said, you know, they've reaped the wind and they'll reap the whirlwind.
Pilot Bob Hodges.
It was a great psychological boost, I think, when it was announced on the radio in the morning that Bomber Command had been over Germany and bombers had attacked targets in Germany. I think this was something which was absolutely essential to maintain the civilian morale at that time.
But as the Germans intensified flak and night fighter defences, so the bombers' losses grew. The airmen, some still in their teens, were considered lucky to survive a month.
There was no chatter. There was no unnecessary banter and so forth on the intercom. There was silence. When somebody switched that mic on, everybody knew it and everybody was listening. And you'd hear them breathing, you know, and if they had nothing to say, the pilot would say, "Who's on the mic?"
worst night of all was the Nuremberg raid of March the 30th, 1944. "96 bombers were lost. Over 500 airmen killed. Maurice Chick was a Lancaster pilot.
We were not hard people. We were young. But when somebody went missing, it was just a matter, as I said, they'd clear out his room and the new person would take over. And you'd feel that particular, the next day when they didn't return, say, well, it's bad luck. And of course the way that they described it, when so-and-so bought it last night. It was a matter of accepting it, that this is what happened in war, and this is that people were lost.
Whatever destruction Bomber Command was achieving, the German authorities ensured that public morale was never seen to waver, especially on the occasion of Hitler's birthday.
In der Reichskanzlei tragen sich mit den Vertretern der diplomatischen Missionen Männer, Frauen und Jugendliche aus allen Schichten des Volkes in die...
The reality was that by 1944, relentless Allied bombing was causing up to 25% absenteeism from factories. Although German aircraft production was increasing, it was only half what had been planned for in 1941. Under constant bombing, the Nazi war effort was flagging. But in the spring of 1944, Bomber Command's attacks on cities were halted in favour of a new campaign.
Apart from the air situation, which is the overriding factor, in particular, air action should be directed towards the reduction of the German air forces on the Western Front, the progressive destruction of the German economic system, and the undermining of German morale.
These are the actual words of the outline plan for the liberation of Europe.
Eisenhower had already given his orders to the Allied Air Staff, British Air Marshal Tedder, American Generals Sparks and Eaker, and Air Marshal Harris, Chief of RAF Bomber Command.
Before launching the invasion, the Allies had to knock out the German Luftwaffe. In the lead-up to D-Day, Bomber Command's task was to hit transport targets in northern France, so as to paralyze the movement of enemy troops and supplies. German transport links throughout northern France had been shattered. At dawn on the 6th of June, Peter Swan was piloting his bomber back to base.
We had no idea that it was D-Day until we came back, and it was a brilliantly colourful day. Warm, I can remember it now, hardly any clouds, and you could see the ships going across the channel, and you could see the armada of aeroplanes and going across the channel, and it was a wonderful sight.
On June 10, 72 Mitchell's No. 2 Group, each carrying 8 500-pound bombs, attacked enemy troops and headquarters at La Cane. The bombing was accurate, and it is known that a general and 13 of his staff were killed. On June 17, Mitchell's and Boston's of No. 2 Group carried out an attack on the marshalling yards at Mézidon, through which the enemy was bringing supplies and troops to the Normandy front. Bombing was very accurate on the aiming point, and many large explosions were seen. Much permanent way was destroyed or damaged, and accurate heavy flak was encountered by our bombers. On July 18, 1,056 aircraft of Bomber Command attacked enemy troop concentrations in the Caen area in 5 waves, dropping over 5,000 tons of bombs in great concentration. The attack was carried out from between 6,000 and 10,000 feet and resulted in our troops being able to advance almost immediately afterwards.
Heavy bombing was now accurate enough to be used tactically in direct support of the Allied advance. Pinpoint night raids requested by the Army struck enemy positions as little as 600 yards ahead of British troops.
The highest example of the bomb maker's art is the 12,000-pound armor-piercing earthquake bomb. The big bomb is brought to a special lathe, at which the final machining occupies the whole of 2 days and 8 hours. Eventually,
the collapse of the German Air Force meant Bomber Command could now begin to operate in daylight, dropping their latest bombs with great precision.
A mainline viaduct becomes the target for 12,000-pound earthquake bombs, scoring direct hits.
Step by step, Bomber Command was crippling the Third Reich.
It was the earthquake bomb that smashed the Nazi submarine pens at Lorient, Brest and other French ports then in German hands.
Even the fortress-like submarine pens could at last be smashed.
Reinforced concrete, these U-boat nests were thought by the enemy to be completely bomb-proof. And so they were before British factories turned out the 5.5-ton bomb.
Now Churchill directed Harris to one of the most elusive targets of all, the pride of the German Navy.
He dug me in the ribs one day and he said, "Why don't you sink the Tirpitz, that glittering prize?" And, you know, and glittering, that's the word to use, glittering.
Too contributed to the disablement of the man-of-war. One way and another, the earthquake bomb gave the knockout blow to the German Navy.
But Harris still believed that attacks on cities were the key to victory.
We propose to entirely emasculate every enemy center of war production if necessary. We are well on the way now to that end. There are possibly 40 centers which are absolutely vital to the production of war materials to the Germans. There are about 50 which are of considerable import to them. They are altogether possibly not more than 100. And we are, as I say, well on the way to their destruction. Now is not the time in any way to ease up, but to put on what indeed may prove sooner perhaps than some of us think the final spurt.
Harris's critics have claimed that his return to city bombing was a misjudgment, and that he should have concentrated more forces on precision raids against oil supplies. But his bombing campaign had forced the Germans to divert nearly 2 million soldiers and workers, and 3/4 of their best artillery and fighter planes, to defend the homeland. Albert Speer, the German armaments minister, said of the bombing offensive, "It made every square meter of Germany a front. For us it was the greatest lost battle of the war." But at the beginning of 1945, the war was not yet over. The Germans had developed a new way of bombing civilian targets. Over 1,000 V-2 rockets were to fall on or near London. The new threat raised real concern. Even by February of 1945, Allied forces still had to fight their way across the Rhine and on into Germany. Up to 13 rockets a day were landing on London. After over 5 years of war, how long could the public's morale withstand these renewed attacks? The Air Ministry was now pressing for attacks on Germany's oil and communications. But Churchill, about to meet Stalin at the Yalta Conference, wanted a spectacular gesture to demonstrate his support for the Russian advance towards Germany's eastern border. He demanded from his planners whether Berlin and no doubt other large cities in East Germany should not now be considered especially attractive targets. Arthur Harris.
Winston, I think, was having a somewhat bitter dispute with Archie Sinclair, the Secretary of State for Air, as to what, if anything, we were doing to help the Russians forward.
On Churchill's insistence, the Air Staff nominated the eastern cities of Chemnitz, Leipzig and Dresden for attack. Eisenhower's commanders were in agreement. The aim was to cause as much chaos as possible to hamper the German army's retreat and reinforcement.
Dresden was bombed on a direct order from Eisenhower's headquarters. And when I informed the Air Ministry that I had got the order to wreck Chemnitz, Leipzig, Dresden in that order, I had it confirmed in writing from the Air Ministry.
Ironically, Harris had been reluctant to bomb Dresden, despite being given permission to attack it by the Air Ministry several months before. He had not regarded the city as a vital industrial target, and as it was so far away, it would be more dangerous for his air crews. Yet the Dresden raid has become permanently linked to Harris's name, epitomizing what people still see as his personal campaign against civilians. Peter Hinchcliffe.
Remember, we had already seen the V1. We'd already seen the V2. There were threats of yet another Vergeltungswaffe. And it was essential to get the war over as quickly as possible.
Static electrical discharge caused by intense cold mars these magnificent bombing.
Clear weather over Dresden and little opposition meant the raids by Bomber Command and by the Americans caused a huge firestorm.
The day after the RAF strike at Dresden, B-17 bombers...
No one is sure how many thousands of people were killed.
Before these attacks, Dresden was planned as a substitute capital in place of Berlin. After this, Hitler will have to look for a substitute for the substitute.
But 6 weeks later, Churchill, who had instigated the raid, shocked his commanders with a secret memo saying, "The destruction of Dresden remains a serious query against the conduct of Allied bombing. I feel the need for more precise concentration upon military objectives, such as oil and communications, rather than on mere acts of terror and wanton destruction, however impressive." A stunned air staff sought Harris's views. He described Churchill's accusations as an insult both to the Air Ministry and Bomber Command. He wrote, "This sort of thing, if it deserves an answer, will get none from me after 3 years of implementing official policy." Shortly after the war, Harris emigrated with his family to South Africa, vowing never to take up another Air Force appointment because, as he put it, "In the midst of my bombing campaign against Germany, it was repeatedly and officially denied in the House by my then minister that my instructions were to destroy German cities. I cannot go back on my refusal. The taste in my mouth is too bitter.
I think the Bomber Command was very, very badly treated. We got no recognition. Harris was badly treated, and that was reflected back on everybody else in Bomber Command.
After the war was over, I don't think people wanted to think about this sort of thing. They would rather like to have thought that we fought a nice, clean war, and I'm afraid that war is not clean.